Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Streaming Alchemy Show. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to take a look at some of the preparation and planning that went behind the live stream we did for the StreamGeeks Summit in New York City about 2 weeks ago. So, this look behind the curtain will hopefully ask some questions about how you prep for a show and give you ways to sort of structure how you think about what you need to do for your next live stream. But before we get to that, I want to remind everybody that, as always, we will be taking callers into the show. So if you'd like to join us and share your experience with setting up for or running a production, we'd love to have you join us here on the show. Also, as always, anybody who'd like to uh, share a comment or question through the chat, that would be great as well. We love the engagement. One thing, though, that we're going to be doing new this show is after the end of the show, we're going to fade to black, then hang around to take any questions that you have in general about live streaming. So we'll stay here a little bit. If anybody has any questions, you can call in again or post them in the comment section. And hopefully, this will become more of a low key, casual discussion where you don't feel like you have to necessarily ask a question that fits into the show. So, why don't we get started? About 2 weeks ago, we ran a production for the Stream Geek Summit in New York, where we handled some of the live streaming that was going out to the outside audience, the premium member audience. And in doing that, I mean, we knew we were going to be doing it, but all the details really didn't coalesce until about 2 to 3 weeks before, as things started to line up. So we were really starting to think about this and, as a set of questions we needed to ask in order to move this forward. So let me jump over to the slides because this will probably help. When we were thinking about what the requirements were for this, we first wanted to focus on, well, what's the content? What is the event format going to be? And essentially, it was going to be a series of panels talking about different live streaming topics. Those panels would have a host and typically four panelists, four participants that would be able to engage with the host and answer questions. It wasn't actually 7 sessions, it was six, and a seventh session was a keynote session that was given. So that was slightly different, but still in the same basic format that we had here. The other thing that we were going to have to cover that was going to be part of this event was an esports competition. Esports was one of the big focus points of this event. And so we wanted in this to carry that out to the general audience. But one of the things we found out was that we wouldn't actually be switching the esports competition. There was going to be 6 players, and they were going to be using a Telestream system, some of the new Telestream hardware that was just released for their Wirecast product. So we were going to be taking a feed from this. So it wasn't something we needed to switch, but it was something we needed to ingest and make available to the streaming audience. So the other thing we knew, and as these details sort of get fleshed out, we knew we were going to have at least 4 cameras. There were going to be more that were sort of floating on the network, but we were going to have at least 4 cameras that were dedicated to us. And we were also going to have a slide feed. So anybody that was hosting one of the panels would be able to put up slides as well. So we knew we were going to be getting that in. As I mentioned, we knew we were going to be getting the feed from the gaming competition. So for the PTZ cameras from the sources side, we were taking the 4 PTZs in as SDI with NDI being available to us anytime we wanted to use that. The slide feed was coming to us as NDI, as was the gaming competition feed. So we knew we were having a mix of NDI and SDI feeds coming in, but we could always go all NDI if we needed to. The other thing we were fleshing out was what were the outputs that we needed to feed signals to. So we knew where we were getting the signals from, but for the output, we found out we were going to be working with a live view system to stream the broadcast. So this wasn't going to be using a local internet. This was going to be using a live view LU600, I believe, as the main streaming system. So we needed a feed for that. There was also going to be a projector that was going to be showing video and other imagery on the screen that was behind the stage. So that was something else that we needed to generate an output for. We also needed to feed a confidence monitor. Now, the stage was fairly large. It was about 20 feet wide, so it wasn't enormous, but fairly large. And so there was a large monitor off to the side that was going to be used as a confidence monitor. So we wanted to make sure we could develop an output for that that would satisfy the needs of everybody on the stage, not just, to see a copy of the video that was being streamed, but hopefully flesh out some of the other things they'd need to know as they were part of a panel. So taking that as sort of our start point for how do we think about what we need to create, we recognized that there were going to be several compositions we needed to put together. So we knew we were going to have whatever the switched program video was. That was what we were sending out as the live stream to the live view system. We also knew that they wanted to have the ability to display slides. So part of this meant we'd need a composition which could show the host or presenter who had the slides uh, as along with the slides themselves on a screen that would make sense. So I see Brad has joined us. Brad, welcome. Great to see you here. So that was another composition that we needed to put together. And then we also thought about, well, what stage information is needed in the confidence monitor? And so we recognized in doing this that these were three distinct feeds that we were going to need to generate. Well, feeds is the wrong term. Three distinct information layouts that we were going to need to feed into different destinations during the event. The program being remote and the video and slides, at the video slides and the stage information being sort of mainly for local monitors, but also as a composite of the program output we were streaming. So one of the things we found out, and this is a big shout out, thank you to New Tech for providing this for the show, is we were going to switch it on to TC1. So we're a TriCaster shop here, so everybody that's involved with our production here in Streaming Alchemy is very familiar with TriCaster. So we were grateful, even though we do know other systems, this was definitely our preference for running this type of production. And so we knew, what the environment was, what we had to create. And so we knew we still needed to develop sort of the graphical elements that went along with all of this. So that was really our next step. Now that we understood the scope and requirements of what was needed, now we had to look at starting the actual development of all this. So in developing assets, you're always thinking about a combination of what system am I developing them for? Because different systems have different ways of working with imagery and different types of assets. So because we were going to be working on TriCaster, we knew we had the macro system. We knew we had mix effects buses. We also had standard downstream keys that were going to be available. And there is a whole framework in the TriCaster world called Live Text, which allows you to develop any types of lower third or on-screen graphics you want. There's also something in the TriCaster world called Data Link, which allows you to reference data sources and display them as part of the downstream imagery you're using. So we knew we had all of these as sort of the framework. So where we wanted to start was we wanted to look at first what were the assets we were going to be given and how would we need to work with them. So the first thing that we knew we were getting were a whole series of interstitial videos, which were basically sort of lead ups to each one of the sessions that were going to be held as a panel. So this was something that identified who was going to be on next, what the topic was, and hopefully gave people a sense, especially those on the live stream, a sense of what was coming. So the continuity of the, the event production. Uh, and the next thing we got was the branding. So imagery that we needed that recognized the StreamGeeks brand in this. So this gave us two things, not only some basic imagery to work with here, but it also gave us the color. So this orange yellow color that's part of the StreamGeeks logo was something that we knew we'd need to incorporate into what we were going to be developing. The other thing that we know from what was being sent to us is that there was an urban feel in all the imagery that the StreamGeeks folks were using to promote the event. So this gave us another reference point to sort of leverage as we were thinking about how to construct the assets we wanted. So with these assets as the provided assets, we decided to start with building the frameworks for the slide presentation and for the confidence monitor we need to put together. So for the slide presentation, we set this up as something we built in a mix effects bus on the TriCaster, ME1 in this case. And so we laid this out using a pretty straightforward format. The branding along the top for the summit itself, we took and put a small video frame in the upper left corner with a larger frame available in the lower right for the slides or any other presentation material that somebody wanted to put up. So we built this. There were lots of ways this could have been done. We decided to build this as a live set. So we did a layered Photoshop file and put this together as two input components, an A and a B bus. And this gave us a simple way to switch between any of the video feeds we wanted for this. And if somebody wanted to bring in something different from just a PowerPoint deck, we had the ability to change the input source for the slide imagery as well. So this was a fairly straightforward component that we needed to build, sort of leveraging what was already sent to us. And if you notice in the back, we used the same sort of city urban type of layout. Again, very understated. We really weren't trying to create a statement piece here. This was much more around framing it in a way that respected the branding that already went in by the StreamGeeks folks to promoting the show. So the next thing that we put together was the confidence monitor screen. So this was slightly more complex, and we knew we wanted to do more on here than simply show whatever video camera was selected back to the people on stage. So when we thought of this, we were thinking really around what is it that we would want to see if we were one of the panel members on stage for any one of these sessions. So the first thing that became important, we thought, was timing. I need to know how much time is left in the session, because if I'm talking, I want to make sure that I respect the overall time of the panel, because there's lots of other opinions besides mine. And I also would want to be sure that I knew as a host how to go through my sets of questions, what I needed to do to sort of wrap up if it came closer to the end, and to basically pace the session. So we added a session timer to this, and this was done using something on the TriCaster. And again, this is why knowing what your target platform is gives you a real focus point for how you want to go about executing on developing assets. There is something where you can say when an event starts and when it ends. And using that, we can then use data link to say, well, based on the current time and the end time, how much time is left in the production. And that was the countdown timer we had here in the upper left corner. The other thing we recognized was that for a lot of people that are part of these panels, this event was the first time they really met in person. They didn't necessarily have a long relationship prior to this event. So we wanted to make sure that we identified everybody. So if you look over here in this section here, we have everything set up here for the names of the people on the panel, who is hosting and who the people are that are making up this panel in seat order. So that's something I'll talk about in a minute. So this meant that when somebody's on stage, if for a moment they forgot the name of the person they were sitting down from and they wanted to address something, it gave them an easy way to say, yeah, I can just look up and say, yes, I know the person's name. And it gave them the opportunity to address them on a more personal level. So now you can start to encourage conversation. And that's something we really wanted. So for the video piece, the big window over to the side, that was just linked to whatever camera was, being shown out to the stream. And this was something we could do just with color groups on the TriCaster. So you select whatever camera is selected in program, could then be selected as the camera feed that's going out in the confidence monitor. So very easy way to just sync everything together for this. And the last thing we did was we laid it out in a way that made sure there was enough space along the bottom that if people from social media were asking questions, that information could be put up and displayed to everybody on the stage in the venue and give them a way to not just interact with each other and the local audience, but also interact with the remote viewing audience. So we felt that this really covered all the things. But when we approached it, we were approaching it very much along the lines of what is really needed. What are the types of things, not the minimum, what do I need to do, but more what's really needed by the people there? What would make this a valuable asset? And I think that's kind of the approach you should take with everything that gets developed for production. So the next thing was building the lower third. So for us, that always starts in Photoshop, as for most people. So the lower third we used was this design. It had multiple layers. So each one of these layers, the one that had the orange yellow color, which was the StreamGeeks branded color, we used for titles. The white color we used for names because we thought that was a good offset. And in laying this out, we actually had a couple of layers here that were, we just put in a name and a title. So as we were building this out and refining it, we could look at how it would appear with actual information filled into it. So we weren't just looking at it as an abstract, graphic. Uh, in the upper right corner of the lower third, we had a big transparent, semi-transparent field, which was just black that was dialed down in opacity, so that gave us a way to let the background show through, but still have superimposed branding on top of that. So we use the uh, Geekhead logo, which is very prominent in StreamGeeks branding, and we placed it in as white, and then we use the text of the StreamGeeks with the summit and the location New York. We set that in there as well, so that provided a nice reminder of the event and the brand and who was sponsoring it. So when we put this together, the goal here was that this could be something that would be fairly flexible. And actually, this came from a design we had already prepped for some changes we're going to be making to the formatting and assets we use in this show. So this is something we had available, and we pulled it in and changed the colors. But with something like Photoshop, this is very easy to do, and you can do anything, even simple, and pull it together to make it look good. So the next thing is we wanted to look at this, of course, over different types of background images. So if it were close up, if it were a wide shot across the stage. So when we did this, every time we would tweak this, we would look at it using different background images to make sure that it held up, that the names and the branding were visible, that the colors didn't get lost or washed out. Even in this case, this is a color where they're very similar background colors, but you still have a good distinct lower third. One of the things you will notice here is that even in the white component and the yellow component, we added just a little bit of transparency to that. So this helps blend it into the background and makes it feel more attached to the imagery that's behind it. but it doesn't do it in a way that it washes out or makes it illegible. So that was something when we were thinking about this, we wanted to do again, trying to make this, become part of the branding exercise. It's something we've talked about in the past, the importance of branding. So this we recognize not just as an informational, but also as a branding asset. And this all came together then once we had this dialed in. We used live text in the TriCaster world to create, I think they are CGXML files, which are basically descriptors for the graphics that go into lower thirds. So that was how we put all of that together. So one of the other things that I mentioned is that there were going to be people commenting on social media and potentially asking questions. So we needed a way to bring that into our production. So the TriCaster doesn't really have any interface for ingesting social media directly. So there's lots of great ways to bring information into the TriCaster, especially having NDI, but there isn't something that was specifically targeting comments made on different social media places. But vMix has an excellent solution for that with vMix Social. So we set up another system using vMix Social that and ran vMix on that that would allow people to pick anything that was coming in across any of the social channels and display that as a lower third in vMix, and then feed that out from vMix over NDI. And when that feed is generated in vMix, we did pre-multiplied alpha channel. And what that basically did was allow that one NDI feed to have the whole transparent area that's around the lower third or around the graphic for the social media comment that was displayed as the lower third. That's all transparent. So we were able to carry that transparency into the NDI signal. And that actually went to one of the downstream keys in our normal, program feed. So there were 4 downstream keys on the TriCaster. So one of them was taken up with that. The other place we put this though was as one of the keys inside ME4 for the confidence monitor. So we were able to just route this one thing in the TriCaster to the 2 locations where we wanted it to be visible, the remote guest, the remote audience and the people on stage. So this gave us an easy way to do that using components that were sort of off the shelf and incredibly flexible. And I think this comes back to why we love NDI so much. In a complex production, the odds that you're going to need multiple systems interacting with each other is very, very high. And NDI is that glue. Something we've talked about before, but just to reconsideration list when you're doing any complicated production that could require multiple systems. It would make life so much easier. So the next thing, and this is probably was a pretty interesting but time-consuming step for us. When NewTek uh, very graciously provided the TC1 for the production, one of the things that did not come with it was a control surface. So it can be very difficult to switch a show using a mouse and just the software on the screen. So we wanted a physical control surface. So we took out an X keys. We had an X keys 128 that we've used for things in the past, and we laid it out as a micro TriCaster control surface. So I have it here on the desk. So if you look down here, it's not an exact mirror clearly of the large TriCaster control surface, but what it does is it has all the key elements that somebody who physically wanted to work with, buttons as a physical touch surface to be able to switch the show. So let me go through it very quickly, and I'll talk a little bit about how we wired it all up. But on the panel, we have program and preview. So on the TC1, there were 16 inputs that are available for any type of NDI source coming in. We knew we were only going to have 4 assigned cameras. We knew we were going to have slides coming in. We knew we were going to have a feed from gaming. We knew we had potentially access to 2 other cameras. So what we wanted to do was make sure we covered all the cameras we needed, but leaving a few extra, because one of the things when you go into a live event is you never know what somebody's going to throw at you on the last, you know, at the last minute. So having some slack in your plan is a good thing. So when we set this up, we set it up with 10 inputs, figuring that should have everything covered. We also knew we were going to be using the DDRs, the two media players that we'd have available. So one for the videos that were played between each session, and the other for anything else that we wanted to put up, something that may be looped video that I think we use for the projector. That was also coming out of a DDR. So we wanted to have those available as well. And then we had an auto and a take, which gave us the ability to use a effects transition or a cut. So we had those baked in. But the model we were using is that most of the controls that were in the going to be used here were going to be targeting whatever was selected in the preview row. So this allowed us to select a camera in the preview row or an ME in the preview row. And then if we needed to make any adjustments, we could do that and then use take to bring that live. So as I mentioned, we had MEs that we were using. So we also have a section up here focused specifically on the MEs. And so the way this is laid out is I could select which one of the four MEs I wanted to use. And when I selected that, that would place that ME as active in the preview row. So that whole thing of moving to the preview row. From there, I could select what camera I wanted in the mix effects bus, or what other types of image sources, so slides or other things. So I had that ability to do this here. The other thing that I could do is in the TriCaster, there are, for mix effects, up to 4 rows that you can have. But because we didn't have the space or the buttonage for 4 ME rows, they actually had the ability to have an A row, a B row, a C row, and a D row, and let you toggle between A and C and B and D. So that's normal on their own bespoke control surface. So we copied that here. So everything we did here now, based on whatever ME we picked, would give us control, and we could pick, am I affecting the A row, the B row, the C row, or the D row, just with button presses. So a lot of capability baked into a very small footprint on that piece. So each one of the downstream, each one of the MEs also have their own keys. In MEs, they're called keys. In the overall production, they're called downstream keys. So it's just a distinction that NewTek makes, but they effectively play that same role. They just overlay whatever is coming out of the ME. So again, we had that available to us as well. We could s- display or pull down any one of the 4 keys that were available in any one of the MEs, whichever one was selected in preview. Uh, the other thing is we had the 4 DSKs up here, which were the actual program downstream keys. So this is how we could put lower thirds on screen or do anything with questions or comments over social media. So that was how we leveraged that. And it's very easy to pull things on and off. The other thing we wanted was the ability to set up things for playing and looping any of the DDRs. So we didn't figure it out a different way, but if you had one of the DDRs selected, then these buttons would work. But that required a change in the interface. That's something that if we had more time, we would have done a little more work on to get that set. But there wasn't a direct way that we saw to make these work with the DDR selected in preview. So this was something that we set up that you had to select it, but you still had the physical button controls to start and loop and autoplay. So that was all set there. So the last thing, which I will start to talk about as we talk about running the production itself, was that we had 4 cameras and they were all PTZ cameras. So we needed to set up some way to recall presets for them. So as we baked in all the presets when we first started the production, we tied them all to specific keys that are on the control surface. So again, if I selected a camera in the preview, just pressing any one of these preset buttons would allow me to pick what sort of preset shot I wanted associated with that. And when it locked in, we could move over and take that as a shot. So over on the upper right side, we just had something that started recording. It did not shut off recording. We didn't want that to be a toggle. We wanted to make it difficult to shut recording off, to do things, anything that could take and cause the stream to be interrupted. Same with fade to black. You needed to press a secondary key along with fade to black to make that work. So that was something we wanted to have that was simple. One of the things that we did add, though, that we wanted to be sure we had was the ability to mute and unmute audio. There are just times where something can happen and you really don't want that being broadcast out sonically to your remote viewers. So that gave us some way to, if the need arose, to quickly mute the audio that was going out. But overall, these were all these were tied into macros that were set up on the TriCaster. So each button press was another macro we had to set up. But overall, this did a good job letting us switch a show with this many cameras and this many sources without having to work all with a mouse. So we were really happy with how this turned out. So one of the other things, though, as I mentioned, is that we also needed to control lower thirds for a lot of people. So let me just switch over here. One of the things that we recognized was that we were going to have panels coming up one after the other, and each panel would have, potentially up to, 5 people that would be on stage as part of that panel. And we needed some way to be able to call up the lower thirds correctly for each person on each one of these panels, as well as things like the intro phase where people could get up and welcome everybody to the event. And of course, anything they wanted to do for closing as well. So what we did is we set up a separate X keys unit that was focused just on titles. And we had it set up so that when I pressed any one of these panel buttons here, it would load all the correct guests for those panels along with the host. And so all you had to do then is press any one of these buttons here, and it would provision the right lower third. And then we could bring that on through one of the downstream keys by just toggling it on and off. So I don't want to go too much in this because next week I'm going to talk about the detail behind this because I think it's pretty interesting how we looked at doing this. There may be other ways or better ways certainly than what we have here, but we think that this covered took a lot of the complexity out for the person switching. And that's one of the things whenever we think of running something in a live production, we are always focused on how can we make it as simple as possible in the moment. So we sort of buy complexity up front. We'll give it the thought, we'll give it the planning. If it reduces complexity and makes it much easier to run the show when you're live and you don't have necessarily the reaction and thought cycles to think through something complex. So this is how we laid it out, and it really worked very well. So this is something we'll be covering on next week's show. So the last thing we needed to do is we needed to stitch all this together in a TriCaster session. Excuse me. So we took all the inputs. If you can look across here, we set up all the cameras that were coming in, all the feeds coming in. We named everything. So visually, if anybody looks up, it was very easy to see what buttons were selected and lots of great feedback to the operator. We also knew, where everything was coming in downstream. So if we wanted to, send something out, this was a clean feed that was coming into the TriCaster. We had the social media feed that was coming in with people's comments. So we knew how all this stuff was laid out, and it was very easy to have all this stuff visually mapped. And when we set that up then for the main program bus, we had multiple downstream keys. So the first one was what we used for the lower thirds. We had a second one that was set up where if somebody wanted to put any type of title, like an event title up, it was easily done. The third was really just a spare we had. If we needed to type in something that wasn't pre-planned, we could just jump in there and use that to do that. And the fourth we use for the social media. So anything that coming in that we wanted to show as a social media update, we could do that then for the uh, remote stream uh, recipients. And that would be a very easy way to do that. You can also see though, and we have this selected to ME4. ME4 was what we built the confidence monitor out of. So you can sort of see the live set that we have for ME4. And downstream from there, we have uh, the social media component. So we had these other things in there. Again, we just preloaded certain things in case there was a need to display it, but we didn't have to. And we really just used the social media where we could pull that on and off based on comments or questions people were making. So everybody on the stage could see that. So all of these lower thirds and everything we did as overlays were all set up in buffers. Buffers are a very powerful construct inside the TriCaster. They can be animated or they can be stills. So it gave us a lot of flexibility. If we wanted to do something that was more creative, we could do that in buffers as well. But we just had the stills in here in buffer one and buffer two. And then this was the overlay I had talked about that we used on the confidence monitor, where it had the time, all the hosts, and guest names, and that overlay there with all the labeling. So that was done there. So we had an easy way to uh, bring all these in and place them anywhere that was necessary inside uh, the streams, the output streams we were set up. And again, this is what we were talking about at the beginning, planning what are the outputs and what feeds do I need and how do I build components that satisfy what has to go out those feeds. So uh, I don't really need to go through everything in exhaustive detail. I just want to give you a sense of how we put it together. The graphics, the videos list over here were the interstitial videos that were set up for between the event panels. And, that was basically it. And on the DDR2, we had a looped video that we used for displaying on the screen behind panelists up on the stage. So the setup itself of the session was fairly straightforward. There was just the planning of the components and how to bring that all together that took the upfront work. So let's talk a little bit about what it took to run the production. So the first thing we knew is when we looked at what is it that we need to cover with the cameras. So the cameras as placement, we knew we had 4 cameras that we could use. So we had a left, center, and right camera set up. So that gave us different angles to uh, what was going on stage. And we also wanted a 4th camera, which was sort of a reaction shot, audience shot camera, because the audience could also use a microphone to ask questions. Uh, that gave us the ability, at least, to try and frame them in for whatever shot we could get. And again, just communicate some of the interactivity that was going on at the event itself. And we want to do what we could to capture that. So this was really how we thought about the layouts. These cameras were all on high poles that were sort of speaker poles. Uh, so the issue with that, of course, is that there can be some vibration, and especially with PTZs, the higher the extension, if you move the PTZ, it's creating torque, a little bit of physics that you get that can cause the pole that it's on to wobble. So we knew that when we ran this in certain situations, we actually not only had to wait for the PTZ preset to lock in and focus, but we also needed to make sure that the stand itself had stopped vibrating. So, sort of a lesson learned from that is if we were doing this, we'd probably use better anchored, heavier weight stands to put the cameras on. But, PTZ Optics was great. They had 4 cameras available for us, and we were very grateful for having all of that equipment at our disposal to do this switch. So the other piece is now we needed to determine what our presets were going to be. So the audience, we really didn't have a lot we could do with presets. We set up a couple of general audience shots that we could sort of bounce between that captured the field of people. but there wasn't anything, really concrete that we wanted other than general coverage. But for each of the for oh, so we have this is ATR Treehouse. Okay, ATR Treehouse. Thank you for coming. ATR just commented that sandbags on the stands would help with the vibration, and I agree. I mean, when we got in there to set this up, that was it was rather chaotic. As anybody who's probably done anything with a live event, you go in and you have a 2-hour window to get everything ready, and you get 80% of it done in the first hour, and then the last 20% take all the time in that last hour. So there are a lot of things that if we could have gone out and gotten some sort of weighting or some better way to anchor them, that's something we could have done. But I agree, sandbags would probably be something I would definitely recommend having with you if you're going to be setting up with these types of environments. So thank you, ATR. I appreciate the comment. So in setting these up, what we looked at for these presets were what shots did I need to capture? So the first one was obviously we need to be able to capture the full stage. And we wanted to have that from all the different angles, so left, right, and center. So we programmed a full stage composition for each of those. Then the next we wanted to do was to capture something which had all of the guests. We felt it was important to not just have individual shots, but to also have the sense of the community of the panelists, that everybody was interacting and talking together. And we needed a way to capture that. So again, on all 3 cameras, we had that set up for an all guest shot. We then had the host only shot. Since the host was, driving this, we wanted to make sure that we could have focused coverage there. And then, of course, we had a shot pre-programmed for each of the individual guests as well. And this is what we use. So some of it was really designed around creating different angles and having these different angled shots potentially be at different depths. So we could do a full stage shot from the center camera and do close-up shots of the panels from the right camera and of the host from the left camera. So it gave us different views we could use, but we could still mix it up to find the ideal shot. But one of the things that you learn as you do was that people move around. So when we framed these sets, these shots for each of the PTZ cameras, we tried to leave sufficient headroom and width so that there was some flexibility to all the people would still be captured without being cut off. But what ends up happening during an event is that the chairs get moved slightly. And so from panel to panel, we actually had to go in and tweak each one of the camera presets as we'd sort of run through this. So with the start of each panel, once everybody sat down, we would typically work with a wide shot, tweak 1 or 2 shots on one of the other cameras, switch to that, and then eventually tweak all of the shots that we needed to tweak to get the right framing for each one of those shots we laid out, those 7 different frames that we wanted. And this is just sort of the nature of the beast. But one of the things that was really cool is that we were able to use, if you look here in this picture in the lower left-hand corner, we have 4 copies of Studio Monitor that are running there, 1 for each of the cameras. So even though we were taking these cameras in as SDI feeds into the TriCaster, we were using the NDI feeds out of those cameras as reference video for each of the shots. And then over here on the right picture, we were using a PTZ Optics IP joystick controller to dial in those shots. So we used the Studio Monitor's reference and used Whisker over IP, because they were all IP connected, to control the dialing the shots on each of those cameras. So this is again another one of those use cases where NDI makes a big difference, and it allowed us to have this camera control sort of baked in. But one of the other things when we were sort of coming back to shots, which we were talking about, that I think was a real uh, effort saver for us is that when we were doing the prep meetings, and we had multiple prep meetings with Paul, Tess, and the team at StreamGeeks, we wanted to make sure that we knew where each guest was going to sit because it made it easier for us to work with the lower thirds. So part of what we agreed to was that when we had these panels, each guest would have an assigned seat on the stage. So even if you had to do little things with tweaking, camera shots, overall, the biggest thing that we were worried about was putting the right lower third up for the right guest, right panel member. And having that available allowed us to do that, not just on the lower thirds we sent out to everybody watching the stream at home, but also what we showed on the confidence monitor. So anybody on stage could see who each of their fellow panel members were by seat. And if you remember, it said host seat 1 up to seat 4. So that was a big saver for us, and that's something that I think these little things can make a big difference. But let me touch on a couple of things here that I think are takeaways. First is that you're you're never going to be fully prepared. So everything you do, you have to be able to think on your feet. So as a as somebody who needs to switch any type of live streaming event, the unexpected will happen. Requests will happen at the last second. And so when you do planning, you should bake in room. Like we added extra inputs and we had things that were sort of lined up as downstream keys if we needed to type something in quickly and do it off of the automation that we already planned. So I think that's the first thing to keep in mind. The second thing is schedules are rarely kept. So the plan originally was that each one of the panel sessions was going to be 45 minutes, and then with 15 minutes where we'd play the interstitial video. And we thought that would give us time to do any sort of adjustments, anything we may have learned from, something that didn't work exactly right the previous session, we'd have time. What had ended up happening was that each panel ran 59 minutes and 30 seconds. So we effectively had almost no time available to make any adjustments. So again, this is the nature of just live events. It's very easy for people to run over, and especially because the material was so deep, it it wasn't something you wanted to necessarily cut off. You didn't want to have a hard, 45 minutes everybody off the stage. So it really worked to the benefit of the event to have these sessions run longer. But it was something that if we had any critical functions planned for that time between events, that would have put us behind the eight ball. We wouldn't have had a really good way to handle those things. And again, it was that thinking that directed us to think about how we wanted to handle the lower thirds for displaying, getting the right things loaded for the lower thirds, because we didn't want to have something that was going to take any real time and, left open if you were time crunched, leave you open to making a mistake and screwing things up around that. So I think that's, that was another thing to really take away from this. But probably the biggest thing is all around planning and prep and communication. You need to be communicating with everybody else you're going to be working with. So uh, we knew when we came into here that the game stream was going to be coming from other folks. And we didn't have a lot of prep time with them. So there were a lot more things we needed to work out with them than, we would have liked. But that was something where we had that prep time with everybody up front in the Stream Geeks and for all the panels. So we had a lot of confidence going into that for those pieces. We knew we weren't going to be doing the sound, so that simplified life for us. But again, this required then when we got on site, we needed to make sure we had better coordination with all the sound folks to give us the feeds that we needed. So these are the types of things that as you go through things, you need to really think about what goes in, and make sure that you're talking with everybody that's involved to the extent you can. So there'll be enough surprises, but make sure that as you look at these things, you at least have the dialogue open to deal with whatever surprises come up, and hopefully that would be the best way to plan around anything. Plan for the unexpected. So we have. I'm sorry, my eyes are not that great. So we have Christian was asking, where did you get the fallback monitor? I really want to get one. So Christian, if you're talking about the monitor we were using for the camera feeds, that was something that was just on a laptop with 4 NDI monitors. Uh, if you're talking about the monitor in the set, I can post the information about this. It's a great touchscreen monitor, perfect for presentations. But everything else we were using was pretty off the shelf there. So Jesse, so thank you, Jesse. Christian, thank you for the question. Uh, Jesse, oh yeah, I wish this were a master's degree class in production, but I think this is something that, even though we've done it here locally, and I've worked with lots of people who actually did the technical execution, the actual switching, this is really the first time outside of our own shows that we did that type of production. So uh, the it was really great, as an experience to put your hands on something bigger than you've been working with in the past here at our own studio and the production we do. But that's something we're always looking to learn. So we were happy to have that opportunity, and get schooled on some things ourselves as we went along. So Lee, yes, I can understand that. Lee Love was talking about his days as a TD when he did sports, live sports, and everything, all of the things you do in larger productions are the same in smaller productions. Just you have more room to deal with it. I mean, we in for the neural net side, we've had the chance to work with folks like Major League Baseball at their advanced media group. And one of the things I found about the productions they did was that they had an A, B, and a C plan, and they could bring in somebody for a D and an E if they needed. So you saw people that were so used to working live and having things blow up that they always had different ways to go about it. And that was one of the great lessons that I've had personally, learning this industry, was seeing how those people operated. They knew how to communicate. They always had a plan. They never panicked. It was really so impressive seeing them in action. And Lee, I know, that's the same. Anytime you get to sort of the bigger players like ESPN, MLB, and lots of the other production shops that are out there doing these types, like esports as well, which is huge sporting production capabilities. They have the experience to have all these types of plans in their pocket for when things go wrong. But I do agree. I mean, Lee's final comment was, at least we didn't have satellite to deal with. No, we had internet last week, which I'll tell everybody about in the post show. What we ended up doing to adjust for that. But so ATR, so they set up a Wirecast machine at the Rocket League. Okay, so that's great. Yeah, so I mean, Wirecast is a great box. They've come out with a Gen 2. And so, though we use the TriCaster, we certainly have a lot of respect for, what the folks at Telestream are doing with Wirecast, and know that's used by a lot of people, that are part of this community. So, we love, the folks that are doing stuff with Wirecast and LiveView. I mean, LiveView is such a great suite of products. If you have the budget to justify using that in a production, it's something I absolutely would recommend. But yeah, I think getting everything. Lee ATR Treehouse's comment uh, was that we actually had that he actually had to work with NDI and live view. So he was doing a lot of the same things that we did. So I definitely know what it's like to have to get everything working, pulling this all together. And one of the things that we actually did as part of the show, and it's something that ATR is calling out, is that we had to switch NDI to multicast because it wasn't working as multicast in this production. So we had to do something with that, you know, midstream. So there was a lot of scrambling in the back end to make all this stuff happen. But that's the nature of live. You do figure it out in the end. Uh, so and Lee's just commenting that there's too much money involved in these things not to have these backup plans in place, and I absolutely agree. The investment you make, it's not just a money investment; it's a brand reputation investment too. So when you think about what you need to do to uh, to pull these types of events together, the reason you do that is fundamentally to enhance your brand. I mean, you're hosting an event, you want to get people interested in a topic, but you want to be able to communicate that in a professional way. So having that, preserving not just the financial investment but the brand investment is really critical. I think most people, would agree. They'll spend more to preserve the brand, rather than cheap out and potentially damage it. Because brand recovery is something that is not easy if you damage what you're promoting as your value, as your capability. So uh, so Jesse was asking about people and what the staffing was. So for the what we did with switching, there were just two people. So I had Matt and Joe, the same people who typically run out shows here. They were doing the switching and any of the camera operation. And they were switching off on that. But there were a lot of people involved. So there were folks from PTZ Optics who dealt with getting all the cameras set up, which was a real godsend because the cameras and the networking, all that gear they handled, which meant we didn't have to have extra people for that. The production of the uh, gaming competition they had there were probably at least 3 people, maybe 4 people involved with that, getting that all set up. And then the folks from the sound group had at least 2 or 3 people there. So in total, from a production side, we were probably talking about, 8 people that were directly involved. And, then other people who came in to do troubleshooting. But for what we did specifically for the switching, we had 2 people. Uh, okay, so yes, so ATR, he said that they were sharing the NDI feeds at the conference. So yeah, that was, that was really it was great trying to pull all that together. And I think this was one of the things that NDI is so good at, as ATR is calling out. We were able, even though we had all this different gear and it was all assembled, within a 2-hour window because of NDI, we were able to glue all this stuff together. So, definitely thanks to, all the folks, that, ATR had and that he was working with because it was a complex event. There were, multiple streamers, where you had different switches taking place and multiple panels. And there were 6 gamers that ATR was having to bring in. So there was a lot of switching that was taking place within the feed that we were getting from him. So, you know, uh, really my thanks to everybody else that made this production go as smoothly as it did. And I think for the scale of the production, we're definitely happy. But like everything, and I mentioned last week, you always take what you've learned and sort of feed that back into how do you improve. And so this cycle of improvement, I think, is definitely something that events like this give us an opportunity to do. So really happy, with having been a part of that, with getting to work with, great people like ATR. But yeah, as Lee points out, it's the challenges that make it fun. Yeah, it's the challenges that have reduced some of this hair up here. It's beyond gray now. So, but yes, I agree with you. I think that's one of the things that is so attractive about live. You don't know what's going to happen in any live event, so you can be sitting there and it will just hit you. Hey, we've got to do this. We've got to add this, or something's going wrong, and either I need to figure out a way to fix it, or I need to figure out an alternative way to cover that function. So I agree, Lee. There is a lot of fun in that. As the engineer in me, the geek in me, is something that you just like problem solving. So definitely something here that about live streaming that probably everybody with that disposition gets attracted to that. So what I'm going to do is we'll end the show now, but I will stay around and we'll switch to a quick post show. So if anybody has any other questions or wants to call in and join me here, and we can talk on air for a bit, happy to do that. So uh, before I go, let me just remind everybody that we will be having a show next week. It's the day after Thanksgiving, but we're going to be talking about using data link and automation. Basically, we'll go through what we did to handle everything for the lower third guest names and switching them between panels. So some interesting things in there that we want to share. And hopefully you'll be able to tune in if you're not in a turkey stupor for those in the US from celebrating Thanksgiving the day before. But that would be great to have you. So we'll end the show now and we'll come right back and be here for any other questions if anybody wants to join in and talk. So until then, take care. Bye. All right. Hello, everybody. So this is something that we added. One of the things I think we were concerned about was that uh, we had great interaction today, and I really appreciate that. But I want to make sure that everybody's comfortable just interacting. And if people want to call in and ask questions, but they don't want to interrupt the show, so I want to make sure that we have a time which is sort of just an open platform time as well. So what I'm going to do is after these shows, I'm going to, hang around, for a few minutes if, nobody has anything they want to ask. But I just want to be available so that if we get onto an interesting thread of a conversation, we can share that with the community as well. But I think one of the key things here is that we don't necessarily have to keep to the topic of the day, whatever the show was. So if folks want to just come and talk generally about anything that's going on with problems they're having, with something they've done that they're really proud of that they want to share, this is the chance for that. But probably, while I'm waiting for anybody that may want to come in, what I just want to just give everybody an update on is part of what happened last week. So we ended up losing internet connection, and we are not 100% sure why, uh, but we did a few things post show to try and make sure that we could minimize those types of interruptions going forward. Excuse me. So the first thing we did was we basically separated the networks that we run on. So the studio was sharing a network with neural net. So we're part of the same group. So the neural net, office network, and the studio network were all one and the same, which made it easier for us as you're composing assets and you want to share files and everything. It made it a lot easier for us to do that. So what we decided to do though was to actually formally split them. So now everything that's part of the studio infrastructure is wired up separately. We're using a Ubiquiti Edge Router Pro as our router for the studio network, and we were using Cisco gear for the office network. So we did that separation. So that we think, doing that and then getting everything tested was one of the big things we made with that. Uh, we also, in doing that, then have a few systems that are bridged across. So we took our our NAS system and everything that. So Ken, hello. Thank you for joining us. And this time we actually are live this time. So I really appreciate you. Uh, Ken Benedict had joined us last week multiple times as we tried to get the stream restarted. So this is a good time to join in. So we uh, we were able to get all that segmented. We actually have several systems like our NAS, for sharing assets that now sits on both networks. So we can save files from one network and pick them up from the other. And there are some production systems that we want to have, on both. So when we do, things that we do for prep and demos that we want to use, we can do that. But by and large now, the networks are segmented. We have a new router, and all of that should be going on its own IP out to the internet. So we feel that the issues we were having yesterday were last week were, definitely around uh, the modem and our interconnect. So, we're not sure we have it, but we think this helped a lot. So, uh, John Holland, let's see, what would be your key tips for designing networks for NDI / Dante? So it's a video person. He's a video person moving away from SDI to NDI. Okay, there are no perfect things, but one of the key things I think is that you need to be sure when you set up a network that everything in it is as isolated as possible with traffic. NDI as a protocol is fairly robust. And there are tools around it that let it span subnets and other things. So you have the ability in sort of setting up your network to do these types of things. But you want to make sure that you are always respecting the bandwidth coming in and out of devices as well as the aggregate bandwidth. In most cases, aggregate bandwidth, even in a 1 gigabit network, is not going to be an issue because what you're really talking about when you talk about 1 gigabit is the bandwidth in or out. So you have 1 gigabit each way of a particular connection on a switch. So every NDI feed, it can be different levels here. So if you're doing 720p, you probably are going to be around 80 megabits per second. If you're doing 1080, 60, you're going to be around 150 and megabits, and 4K, you're going to be 250 megabits. So you have to respect sort of the bandwidth limitations going into a device, but typically switches are able to handle full bandwidth going in and out. So that shouldn't be one of the issues. But ideally, you'd have a managed switch. You'd want to make sure that it's not a power green switch. And this is not bashing our desire to be good stewards. This is just sort of the nature of the way those switches operate. When they power down to lower power mode, you can lose bandwidth, and that can cause problems with NDI. Uh, you can definitely use multicast. That's something that will save bandwidth on the network, and especially bandwidth coming out of devices. Because if you're sending a stream multicast uh, for for everything else, layer 2, layer 3, IGMP, I would probably need to get more technical people than myself on here to talk about that. Uh, but if that's something that's interesting, it's definitely, we can probably get somebody on that could talk at that next layer down. But I mean, the layer 3 switch is really just going to give you, what you need on the management side. It will give you the ability to do things like create virtual LANs. So you could pull that together. Uh, but I think the key thing here is you want to make sure that you start out with sort of quality components, start out where everything uh, is basically designed to spec. So if you're doing one, my network setup won't necessarily work ideally for you. So, the I think this is something that if you have more specific questions around your environment, so you're saying you have 4 to 5 cameras. So a typical gigabit network with 1080p, 4 to 5 cameras should work ideally. In and out, that should work. If you need it, to work with more devices as well, where you want to take in computer screens, that's going to eat into bandwidth. If you wanted to do any types of feeds from other systems, which might not be camera. Again, that may take up bandwidth. So it's not a blanket yes, but I think starting with managed switches that give you the ability, configuring those switches specifically around your environment, and sort of testing it in the real world scenarios are sort of key baseline stuff to work with. If you're going to use PoE, you want to make sure you're PoE plus on your switches. Uh, and that means you can get, most cameras are going to be around 20, about 15 uh, volts required. And so PoEs, I think, can give you, you know, uh, higher than that. PoE plus switches can give you higher than that. So that would be something to keep in mind. But, John, definitely, I know this is probably not answering your question in the level of detail you need. But if this is something you want to, ping me with a share in the group, we can, certainly give you a more detailed answer and maybe diagram some of this with you with ideal ways to do this. So uh, ATR was asking about the Live View Solo, and they just picked up a rento today for a show next week with a corporate client who cannot break out from behind the firewall. Okay, firewalls are never fun, and especially corporate firewalls. Anything you do with security on a network, which is probably something else that impacts John as well. Anything you do, you need some level of security. You need to make sure you can control access. But firewalls, some people make it to the point where you can barely get your job done. And something we've always talked about with live streaming is that getting something that when you're in a live environment, you're going to have to be able to react to things. And if you have networks that are so locked down that you can't do the things you need to react to situations that will come up in a live event, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So, this is something that, is not easy, and especially in the corporate environment because it is so ingrained, uh, you know, the security aspect and, how networks have to be locked down. And let's face it, I mean, in all fairness, nobody's going to get fired because you can't get to a particular website. If somebody gets into the network that shouldn't be there, that's going to get them fired. So the default case is going to be to lock things down. Uh, the live view, on the other hand, is a great way to deal with forgetting internet in environments where the traditional hardwired connection is just too locked down. Uh, Live View Solo, the whole Live View line is really great. So I think the Live View Solo is an excellent option. The reliability is really going to come down to for Live View Solo or any of the Live View or any of the bonded cellular. It's going to come down to two things. Number one, the quality of the cellular connections you have. So you will probably want to work with multiple cards, multiple uh, access points for different cellular providers. So if AT&T is having issues in an area and you have Verizon too, or you have Sprint, you have some variety here that if somebody has a problem, the others probably aren't. And it also depends on the number of uh, wireless cellular devices, bonded cellular devices you have. Now, I could be wrong, but I believe the LiveView Solo supports up to 2. It may be 3, but I think it's 2. So that gives you, I would definitely do something where I'd have like Verizon and AT&T and T, and just make sure that, those are covered and you get the quality that you get, uh, from those two providers. If you end up having difficulty connecting to one of those, there's poor cell coverage in the venue, then you are down to sort of one provider only. So you won't necessarily get a lot of bandwidth out of that, but that typically isn't the case. Uh, but where you could also have problems are on large venue type events where there are a lot of people with cell phones. So everybody with a cell phone is competing for that same bandwidth you are. So that's something else to consider in terms of reliability. The other thing, though, and I know I've talked to people that have had this issue, uh, is okay. So ATR is saying that it shipped with three. So okay, so the Solo has three modems. So that's great. So I mean that gives you more flexibility. The other thing though to keep in mind is that you can run into cases where the metal inside big arenas, the stands and the walls and the concrete can act like a Faraday cage and block out signals. So you can find yourself where you get really poor internet connectivity, even though you would normally have great bonded cellular coverage. So for some people, I know they've actually taken and run long hardwired connections out to these systems to like, the LiveView Solo, where you could take an SDI connection, run it out, and position the unit out in a place which has better cell coverage from where you're doing the switching. So, that's something that is definitely you should keep in mind, to make sure. So if you're using HDMI, that run is going to be smaller. I mean, I really wouldn't recommend an HDMI run over about 30 feet. SDI, you have hundreds of feet that you can do it comfortably. So that would probably be something to keep in mind. But so hopefully that answers your question. All right. So one other thing, I just wanted to. A couple of weeks ago, we had Jeff Fitzgerald on the show, Jeff in High Def, and I just found out yesterday that he was nominated for 4 Emmy Awards for work he's done for PSAs for volunteer fire companies, and I just wanted to share that. I mean, Jeff in High Def TV. Jeff's a really great guy. If you haven't had the chance to connect with him uh, online, definitely worth reaching out to him over social media. Incredibly generous with his time. He's also on the show Live Social, which is a show by Telestream focused on Wirecast. So you can definitely catch him there. Deep well of knowledge, and a really great person. But definitely, I just wanted to recognize that as an accomplishment. I think that's something that's can be aspirational for all of us. But so Jeff, congratulations here on air. Uh, really proud of what you've accomplished there. All right then. So if there are no other questions, uh, why don't we call this a wrap for today's show? We'll be back next week, and I know it's the day after Thanksgiving, but we'll be talking about some of the stuff we did for the lower thirds and how we manage that. So that's going to be a deeper dive, a little more technical, more specific to the TriCaster, but hopefully some general stuff in there as well. So everybody, thank you for hanging around with me. It was a lot of fun. Take care. See you next week.